All right. Hi, everyone. So my name is Mike Hardington. I am a developer at a company called Ionic. You can find me online anywhere as M Hardington. And I want to talk about building pixel perfect apps with Ionic and what the framework provides, how you can be productive with it, and the type of apps that you can build, just by knowing some HTML, CSS, and a little bit of JavaScript. So we're looking at Ionic today. What is Ionic? If you've never heard of Ionic before, it is a collection of UI components for building apps that are deployed to native iOS, native Android, and the web as well. You use our components inside of your traditional JavaScript apps, and then you're able to mimic the UI and form factor of these native platforms with pixel precision. Everything inside of there is super high quality and built from the ground up to feel right at home for whatever platform you're deploying to. Now, these just aren't only components, but these are interactions and a lot of things from the UX side that people would expect to get. So animations, gestures, being able to hook into when a user swipes on their device and be able to trigger, say, a navigation to either back into their app or into some other route or perform some other action that you could customize yourself. There's also a concept in here called platform continuity, and I'll touch on this a little bit later. But all this really means is that the styles and the UI for all the components feel right at home for their platforms. An iOS user is going to open up your app, and they're not really going to be able to tell what the technology was that built this app because it's going to feel right at home for there. And for apps that need to have a set of customizations, or you have a company with some really strong branding guides, we provide a API and a way of being able to customize the app without really having to do a whole lot of work. And I'll touch on this as we go forward, but let's take a look at some of the components and how this works. So from the components, we cover everything from this small little number widget or small little badge to larger navigation-based components that you can use to wire together a tabs-based app like any social media app or messaging app. We also have buttons, cards, grids, sort of the usual suspect of components. And these can all be composed together to create, greater components than the sum of their parts. Some of these components even include custom gestures by default. So if you think of your mail app on either iOS or even Android, you can swipe to reveal a collection of actions or buttons that exist below the message or the email that you just got. That's pre-wired into the component, and native developers don't have to build that. To get those features. With Ionic, you can use these sorts of features to be able to go ahead and just you can use these components to enable these features without having to code up any of that gesture logic yourself. So it's really nice to be able to build out these components, to build out these actions, but just using components as the way to do so. The customization that we were talking about earlier is built around this CSS custom properties API. We'll take a look at how this works in practice, but really what it means is that we're able to provide a set of standardized custom CSS rules that allow you to go ahead and just say, I don't want this default color to be blue. I would like it to be green. I could go ahead and just change that value. It would automatically reflect into the user's app. So a lot of great things here, a lot of possibilities with these components, all of them just kind of building on top of one another. So what really illustrates this is this example of a card. Now, I think of cards as kind of the bread and butter of any UI library, because if you can build a card right and you have all the moving pieces there, you should be able to build any other complex component correctly. So here we have an example of a card that we provide in Ionic using the tag name Ion Card. So just a little way to preface this, so that way we don't have any conflicting styles that could be applied to any other card from any other UI library. Inside of this card, we're just going to throw in an image. It's going to point to some asset that we have, and it's going to load that image. And on the side of this code, we can see we have a image over here that is using the full width of the card. So this card feels right, nice and well designed. Let's add some content below that. So we're going to use card content. This component is automatically prefixed with this Ion card tag name. So that way we know this should only be used inside of a card. It's scoped specifically to work inside of this component. So that way its styles all meld together. Now, I removed it just to keep the actual code here pretty short, but in the actual code that's built to make this card, we have this card subtitle and then this card title that are also using their own card tags. So we have an Ion card subtitle tag and then an Ion card title tag. They're all built so that way the styles here flow well together. There's enough vertical spacing between all of the individual components, and the font sizes and font weights are all appropriately set. Now, this is an example of a card on iOS. Now, notice there's a nice subtle shadow behind the card. There's a particular radius around the border of this card. It feels like an iOS card should feel like. This is that same exact code, but just deployed to an Android device. The card itself has a slightly different look and design. The border radius is a little bit less. There's still a drop shadow here, but it's very, very subtle, which feels right for Android. These components can automatically detect what platform they're on. So that way, whatever platform you decide to deploy to, they're going to feel right at home. And this happens automatically by default. If you want to change this however you want to, say, always be in iOS, you could do that. But it's best to let the components automatically just pick up what platform they're on and use their own logic in here. Now, the components themselves, they are just a collection of HTML tags and CSS and JavaScript, which you could use to build your own app, kind of piecing together components without any JavaScript frameworks. But in my opinion, if you're going to be building an app, you're going to want to choose a framework because it's going to give you the most stability and forward-facing features than just trying to build it yourself. So out of the box, Ionic integrates with all of the, I would say top 3 frameworks that are out there for JavaScript developers. That is Angular, React, Vue. And if you don't want to use a framework, there is still just the vanilla JavaScript. So if you wanted to get away from frameworks and wanted to use the core API directly, you can. I'm going to focus on its integration with frameworks today because that's where I think there is the best story. But if you want like an option for like a lightweight framework that doesn't really get in your way, you could use something like Vue or React. If you're building in a larger enterprise, I would argue probably just use Angular because it's going to be the most consistent experience across your entire team. These components, when they're in the framework world, will integrate with the framework's native component API. For example, if we were inside of a React app, we are going to be rendering out React components. Inside of a Vue app, we're going to be rendering out Vue components, and in Angular, we're going to render out Angular components. So there's no translation layer where, okay, well, now I need to realize how these components work in one framework. Once you understand how the framework approaches each component, you can just apply that logic across the board. And probably the coolest part, I think, is this router integration. Now, routers are actually a really difficult problem to solve in front-end world. So we have our own router component that integrates with the default router solution from all your frameworks. So in Angular, it's going to use the Angular router. In React, it's going to use React router. And in Vue, it's going to use Vue router. Now, your router configuration actually ends up being the same thing that you would use in all the frameworks. So Angular, you're going to be using the router module, React router, same thing, Vue router, same setup. The only difference is that you swap out the outlet for your own custom Ionic router outlet. This provides all the transitions, their own complex animations, and different ways of managing the state between these components automatically. So we'll take a look at what that means in practice, but it's good to know that these routers are going to integrate well with one another. And this is just something, nice to point out, is that Ionic is not just this small community used by a handful of people. It is this large community that has members all over the globe. You go anywhere in the world, you're probably going to find someone who at least knows about Ionic, and more than likely has built something with Ionic at some point in time. We have a bunch of companies that we work with that are in the top enterprises, the Fortune 500, Fortune 100 companies that are building their mission critical apps using Ionic. So if you're using Ionic, you're probably going to have a good chance to get a job at some big company. Just throwing that out there. Not that that matters in the quality of code, but it's always nice to know. So I'm going to look at how we can build out an Ionic app. I'm going to be using my framework of choice, which is Angular. You could use your framework of choice, which could be React, could be Vue, could be no framework at all, as we had one question already. This is not I say you should be using this framework. This is what works for me. It makes sense for me. Note that everything that we're going to go over here can be applied to all these frameworks. Nothing really is specific to Angular except when I call it out. And even then, there's going to be a way to use it in React, Vue, or no framework at all. So for quick little primer for the uninitiated, Angular, it's a self-described modern web developers platform. They give you the concept of templates, components, and decorators, basically taking a JavaScript class, some HTML that they can annotate, and this concept of a decorator where you can say, I have a class. Here is an accompanying template and styles and tag name. Throw this together, and when Angular does its building, it will use that component tag name and template to wire up the logic and make sure that it's rendering the correct things inside of the browser. Now, all frameworks these days have their concept of a component or a template or some sort of UI layer. So this isn't specifically unique. What's unique about Angular, and a big reason why I like it, is the CLI tooling out of the box. It gives you the all of the modern build tools that most people are used to using, and this cool thing called schematics, which allow you to build out your app in a pretty consistent way. So if you are, again, from a large enterprise and you would like to have a consistent structure to how your app gets built, what kind of files are used, schematics can come in here and really help you out. And we can take a look at that later on if there's any interest. But we're not going to focus too much on Angular itself, because I said all this stuff can be done in React, Vue, or no framework at all. We're just going to look at how this can work, specifically focusing on the Ionic part. So let's just kind of dive into it. I don't have many slides. I like live coding. So let's swap over to my terminal. So to get started and to get building with Ionic right away, we're going to have a few things set up. First, we're going to want to make sure that we have Node installed, a relatively recent version of Node, and then also an npm, which is relatively recent as well. So we have Node, npm, and we can install things correctly. For this, we can install the Ionic CLI, which is going to give you the tools you need to start a new project, add features to your app, and to build for the native runtimes by just running npm install -g Ionic CLI. This will go through, download the packages that it needs, and make sure that you have the Ionic command line interface inside of your path. So we don't really need to run this because I've already done this. And what we can do is create a project. We'll say Ionic start. And it's going to ask us if we would like to use this online app creation wizard. I don't really need to use this, so I'm going to say no. And then it's going to prompt us to pick a framework. So in this case, we have the options for Angular, React, and Vue. Like I have said, you could pick whichever one you would like. I'm going to just pick Angular. What's the project name? I can say my app, and then hit enter and have it go through, install all the dependencies that it needs, and give you a project already set up, ready to go. So I'm not going to run that because it does take some time, especially if you are trying to stream, download things. It's a hassle. So I've already thought ahead, and I have this directory that I've built out that has all the dependencies installed, and it basically is good to go. So we're going to look at this real quick. I only show you the file tree to just point out we have an Angular JSON. So if you're an Angular developer, you know, all of this is pretty familiar. We're not doing anything overly complicated. We have some linting for all your configurations. We provide a testing framework out of the box. We basically just give you an Angular project and give you all the tools you need to go from there. So let's go ahead and look at our app. Since this is Angular, let me just bump the font size real quick. Since this is an Angular project, we have a source directory with this app directory, and inside of there we have this app module directory, or file, pardon, where we have all of the dependencies needed to bootstrap our application. So we include this Ionic Angular package, which is this core package that Ionic provides. It gives you all of the components that work in a very Angular fashion. And then we just register it with our root ng module. And you know what? Let's just run a dev server to show you what this actually is doing. Much easier to do that than actually just walk through the code. So let's run this command, Ionic Serve. We have a bunch of different options that you can do with this. If you want to just run help, you could see all of the different flags that you could pass, a little description of what it actually does. And we could just say Ionic Serve, and we'll go ahead and run Angular's own dev server under the hood. So this is all just working as we would intend it to do. It's starting up our live reload server. And let's just do a quick window management game. I'm going to move this real quick. There we go. So we have our dev server here. Here we have just a, ready to create an app. We have a link to our documentation, and then this UI over here. So let's look at the code real quick for that. So I can tell by the route URL that we have up here, we are on /home, and then inside of /home, this format, we have this home component that we are loading up. So our home component is going over here. We have the component itself, which basically has no logic. And then this homepage.html, which is our visual logic, all of our template. So we have this header, which, hey, I'm going to assume based on the title over here that this is this little bar at the top of the app. Makes sense. I don't know quite really what this Ion header thing is doing. This other container over here. I don't really need this at the moment, but I'm really confused at what's going on with this header. So I'm not really confused. I do know what's going on here. Let's just go away. Let's just go ahead and say generate 100 paragraph tags. See if we can get this to scroll real quick. I believe I forgot item $. No, my snippet foo is failing me. There we go. So we just have a paragraph tag where we're generating all these different items, still not showing me what this second header is doing. But if we remember back to the beginning, I said that the components automatically adopt whatever UI paradigm the platform should be using. And we do this with a bunch of different mechanisms, but the quickest way to do this is to just go ahead and say, develop. I want to set my user agent to, let's just mimic the iPhone. Now, we're mimicking iOS in style and user agent only. So when we start scrolling, we can see that this header goes ahead and just hides right behind this main one. So we have this idea of a collapsible header that you see on iOS all the time, built right into the platform. So this is really nice. I like how this works. I like how this design is going. I'm not necessarily a fan of all these paragraph tags, so let's replace these with a few components. So we're going to make use of this IonList and then this Ion item tag, and just to have it render in here. And you know what? We're in Angular. We can do things the Angular way. Item, and we're just going to say ng4 let item of, I believe it's array dot constructor 100. Is that not going to? Array dot constructor. There we go. That should be it. And then inside of that item, this isn't really anything specific to Ionic. This is just a nice, if you're an Angular developer and you just need to create a quick array, keys, I think. There we go. So we now have just a quick little array that we're doing over here. We're iterating over 100 elements. We have our items. They feel right at home for iOS. If we go back and we switch the user agent, just be default, it's going to default to something that looks right at home for Android. So we're going to use this material design look and feel and go ahead and just render all this stuff out. Now, this is okay. What happens if we were, for instance, to try and go ahead and let's just navigate. If I recall, I had something here in my router configuration setting up for this edit page. So let's go ahead and add this. We're going to go ahead and say, oops. Let's just have I'll use a router link. This is an Angular concept, so don't worry too much about it. But we are integrating with the Angular router to navigate to the edit page. Now, all of a sudden, all of these items become clickable. And if you have some eagle eyes over here, you can see that we are getting some good accessibility options that are saying, hey, this has a link that we should go to. It's going to link to localhost 8100/edit. If we go there, well, we have a little something that's going to come up later in the demo, but we have this new page. And I really want to show what this looks like in iOS again. And I might just stay in the iOS mode because that to me is pretty fun. So here in iOS mode, one of the big design cues that iOS has is that it has these little arrow icons to indicate that there's something that this item could link to. So this is going to link to a new page, and you notice that the navigation going there is going to have this slide in navigation that feels right at home for iOS. So we can go in here, we could swipe to go back if we needed to. Let's try to do that. Yeah, there we go. Swiping to go back. There's a lot of interactions happening here. So this feels right at home to an iOS platform. Let's go ahead and continue with this, but I want to go through and actually swap out this, array over here with some real logic, some real pieces going on that are going to show us just what we can do with Ionic. So let's just go and we're going to swap out this array constructor for, I believe it's called notes. Now, notes is a property on our class component itself that is going to have an array of strings, and right now it's just an empty array. So if we were to say this real quick, it's not going to show anything, but we haven't implemented the logic here. To do this, we're going to make use of a secondary project called Capacitor. Now, this might be a lot all at once, but only thing that you really need to know is that Capacitor is essentially a companion project that we've created to make it easy to deploy to these native platforms, where we can think of Ionic being just a visual aspect, and then Capacitor being the real engine underneath the hood of everything. We don't need to focus too much on the tooling and everything going on underneath because we've extracted a lot of that away. So let's go back to my editor and let's actually go ahead and start to implement this. So I have this idea that I want to build a note-taking app. We're going to interact with the file system. We're going to read from the file system and write to it. Let's go ahead and try to do this. So to make this happen, we're going to use this Capacitor file system API. This is something that we've provided by default. It's going to give you a cross-platform way to reach or to interact with a file system that's going to work in both the browser, but also on the native platforms, and interact with the native platform's own file system. So here we're importing the file system API itself in a couple of different types. Because this is TypeScript, we can go ahead and make use of some types and this enum over here. And we just have this no-op function for some utilities later on. Inside from here, we would like to go ahead and say, hey, when the user has entered this view, attempt to, request access to the file system. iOS has this sandbox file system API, so it's only going to be able to get access to the files that are contained inside of the app. So this is pretty usual. So we just want to ask permission, and then we're going to do this thing called a init file system. Now, a init file system is going to be a method on our class where we're going to say, make this directory if it exists, and we'll add the implementation later, and then go ahead and read from that directory after it's successful. We should get a list of files afterwards, and then we're just going to do a quick little sorting algorithm to do some pretty basic sorts of find me the notes in chronological order. And once that's done, we're going to read the directory itself. Let's add this functionality implementation. So what are we doing here? We're going to say file system read dir. Pretty basic right here, right? We have this file system API. It provides this read dir function. We're going to go ahead and say, hey, go ahead and read from this notes path inside of the documents directory. Once we're there, we also just want to make sure that we have this made. So we can have this nice way of saying, hey, make the directory if it's needed, otherwise just read from it. Now, once this is all done, we have our notes already created. Let's go ahead and save. Now, we don't have any notes at the moment, so let's go ahead and let's add a button in here to try to make this note. So we'll say Ion buttons, meaning that it's going to be a collection of other buttons, and we are going to go ahead and create a router link heading to edit, and we'll just say new. And then to position this, well, let's see what it looks like automatically. So by default, the buttons aren't going to be in any particular position. So they're going to render on top of the title, which might not always be what you want. So we can use this slot property to say, render this at the end. So this will render in a left to right mode. It's going to render this on the right. And then in right to left mode, it'll render that on the left. So whatever the last or the end position is of that language direction. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to create a new note. And now we need to implement the logic for this. So we can go to our edit page. And inside of this, I just have this Quill Editor, which is an open source text editing plugin. It works with various different frameworks. This is just one for Angular. There is one for React and for Vue, so or no framework at all. So you can use this in your project. We go to the actual component itself. We just have the setup for toolbar and for the note itself. So let's go ahead and add the logic and implementation here. So we'll do the same kind of imports where we import directory, this new one called encoding, and then the file system API itself. We will check to see if we have a note ID. Basically, if we are editing a new note or an existing note, we should try to load that data. And in that, we'll go ahead and read our file system to see if that note exists and then get the data from that. If we do have some data, let's just set the current content to be that data. So just read the file. If there's anything in that file, let's render it. Otherwise, we need to have some ways to save the data or delete the data. So to save a data, we're going to create this method called save, where we can say, hey, is the note, the file, should it be an existing note ID? If so, yes. Otherwise, just go ahead and use this date.now prefix. And then we'll write that data to the file system. From here, we can go back, do the delete real quick, where we get the current file. If there is a file, let's go ahead and delete it and then go back as well. And then go back itself is just going to say location, not go back. So let's go ahead and add that. And then we're going to go into our toolbar again, add this buttons and set it to be end. And then inside of the buttons, we'll just say Ion button. And just for speed, we'll click save. We'll only implement save. So our button is working. Let's go back to the home page just to make sure that we have everything set up correctly. We'll go ahead and click new. I'm going to say, here is my note. I can select it. I can kind of do formatting. This is all just stuff that is provided by Quill. And I did notice a mistake. Let's just go ahead and add some text for this. So let's try that one more time. And we'll shorten to my new note. Set it to, and then click save. And here we are. We already have our note in here. We can go back to the home page real quick. And if we actually wanted to make this dynamic, we would just say router link, surrounding this with some bindings, and then pass in an array of routes that we want to navigate to. So we would go to edit, and then pass in the item itself. And we'll come over here, and hey, we're reading that data from the file system. So this is really nice. This feels really good inside of an iOS app. Let's go ahead and try to load this or deploy this to iOS. Working in the browser, let's try to deploy it to an iOS app. So in here, we can actually just say Ionic Capacitor add iOS. It's going to go ahead, try to install the latest Capacitor platform, see that we already have this going, and it's going to ask us to go ahead and try to run the project itself. So we can say Ionic Cap run iOS, and it's going to go ahead, prompt us to actually build the project and select what platform we want to deploy to. So this is all just really nice stuff. I'll select the iPhone 11. The same setup would work for an Android development environment. iOS just happens to be a little bit faster for me. Copy the assets, and then it's going to go ahead, run the necessary scripts needed to set up your native project and deploy it to that simulator or that real device if you had one plugged in. So let's give this a moment to do its thing. It tends to be a little slow at the start, but we should have some time for this. While we're waiting, I'll grab another sip of water. And Xcode run was, or Xcode build was feeling very generous to me. It only took 33 seconds, which is not that bad. And we should be able to see a simulator starting up any moment. Oh, see it in the taskbar. Here we go. And it's going to go ahead and deploy the app. Here we go. We're inside of our app. We can go to our new notes. Let's go ahead and say hello from iOS. We can select all of this, change that title, and let's go ahead and replace that with proper spelling. And then we'll hit save, and here that note is already saved to the file system. So everything's working as expected. But what I did notice is that the navigation was missing, animation when you go back, and the title is blank. So normally at this point, you would probably make those edits, go ahead, deploy it again, do a rebuild, but we don't need to do it that way to get these updates going. We're still using web technology here, so we can do Ionic Cap, run iOS, and then pass in this live reload flag to make sure that we are using the live reload server from our web platform. So we'll select our iPhone again. It's going to watch and do the same stuff as before, where it's going to go ahead, set up the dev server and deploy to the actual device. So we'll give it a moment. And then it'll run sync, passing it to the right target. See, the build times this time were much quicker. And then here we go. The app still looks the same, feels right at home. But if we come up to our homepage, and let's see, we'll select blank and then say notes and then hit save. The reload's automatically applied and I don't have to go in and navigate the rebuild process. It just works. So inside of the edit page, let's fix that change real quick. So this is using the default Angular location service. And while it works, it's not exactly what I need. So I'm going to import something from Ionic Angular. And we're going to import this nav controller, which is just a little routing handler that we provide. And we're going to do a pretty quick and dirty swap here. We'll get the nav controller, and then instead of going back, well, oh, I guess it is the same. So we'll just do that, hit save again. And let's create a new note. One more time for live reload. And then, yeah, it looks pretty good. We'll hit save. And then here we go. We have the new note in place. You can see that it is the newest and latest note because it is listed up top. If we were to go ahead and do this for, yeah, we'll try it now. A few minutes later and hit save. We'll have yet another note. We have this whole thing working, and these files are actually stored on this device. So if I were to delete this note or delete this app again and then reinstall it, all these notes would be gone. But if I were to close this out, let's see, close it in there, open it up again. Hey, all my notes have already been maintained here. So this gives you a nice way of saving all that data by just using the file system API that is provided on the platform. And I would say this looks pretty dang close to being native. Typography is right, styles, the animation, built in probably about 30 minutes. Not bad. So let's go back to our slides real quick and just, kind of wrap up as we get towards the end of the session. Building with Ionic is pretty awesome, I would say, although I am a bit biased because I work for the company, but I was using Ionic way before I even joined the company. Gives you all these great simple concepts with a nice, easy development process, as well as having a great UI layer for your app. So if you need something that's going to look right at home and you don't want to spend your time writing your own CSS, Ionic is going to give you plenty of options. If you are a developer and you really want to make sure that you reach all of the core platforms, Ionic is going to be there for you. You'll get iOS, Android, web, and, if you want to be really cool, you could do desktop apps with Ionic. Let's go back. This is a desktop app that I've built out using Ionic. Feels right at home in not only a desktop PWA environment, but also right on an iPad. So if you are trying to build anything and you want to, have a good time, Ionic, Capacitor, plus any JavaScript framework or no framework at all, yeah, you're going to have a great time. Some pretty nice news. We have been around for a while that we finally reached version 6.0. This includes a lot of awesome features. Rebuilds have been sped up considerably. The design updates have been updated to match the newest guidelines and languages from iOS and Android. We've also included a bunch of new components that people have been asking for a while. So if you have not tried it, check it out now. If you have tried it and have always wanted some pretty cool components, check out V6. We're going to be posting more news about this next week. And it's what we think is a solid base for the future of Ionic. That way we can be around for the next 5, 6, for however long we are needed. So if you want to get started and you want more information, you can check out ionicframework.com/docs. It's going to give you all the details that you need. And if you're specifically interested in the capacitor portion, you can go to capacitorjs.com/docs to see how to get started with that. My name has been Mike Cardington. Thank you so much. If you have any questions, I'll take them now. Otherwise, enjoy the rest of your evening or morning. Okay, so we do have a question. So we can get away from frameworks and go direct. Yes, if you are interested in working with no framework at all, we do have some guidance here. The documentations, if we go back, you go to ionicframework.com/docs. We have a whole section on if you use the CDN. It'll show you how to set up all of the components yourself and how to use them in a situation where maybe framework just doesn't make sense if you're embedding it inside of a platform or an existing platform. You can use that. It's just including a script tag and CSS inside of your app. Then the components will be available and you can use that and go that route if that is of interest to you. If there are no other questions, I guess that's it. Awesome. Thank you so much, everyone.